The Mafia and the Nun. Part 1, The Church Bell Rings. The soft tolling of the church bell echoed through the serene evening, its gentle chimes punctuating the stillness that enveloped the small town. Sister Lucia stood at the altar, her gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight, the warm glow casting a pensive shadow across her delicate features. Lucia had always found solace in the sanctuary of this ancient stone church, its hallowed walls a haven from the outside world. Here, she could lose herself in the rhythm of prayer, the weight of her vows a constant comfort. Yet, on this particular evening, a subtle unease stirred within her, a restlessness that she couldn't quite place. Clasping her hands together, Lucia allowed her eyes to drift closed, her lips moving in silent devotion. The familiar words of the rosary flowed through her mind, a mantra that had guided her since she first donned the habit. But tonight, her concentration wavered, her thoughts drifting to the world beyond the church doors, a world she had chosen to leave behind. A sudden sound, the distant rumble of an engine, interrupted the tranquility. Lucia's eyes snapped open, her gaze drawn to the open doorway, where a lone figure now stood, silhouetted against the fading light. Damien, the town's notorious bad boy, stepped into the church, his presence in immediate contrast to the sacred space. His dark leather jacket and worn jeans clashed with the reverent atmosphere, and Lucia felt a prickle of unease as their eyes met. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken tension. Lucia's heart raced, her fingers tightening around the rosary beads as she observed the young man's slow, deliberate approach. Damien's footsteps echoed through the church, his gaze never leaving Lucia's face. There was a vulnerability in his expression, a hint of something that belied the rumors of his reckless behavior. As he reached the front pew, he slowly lowered himself to his knees, his head bowing in a gesture that surprised Lucia.
"Good evening, sister,"
Damien murmured, his voice low and rough, a stark contrast to the reverent silence that had previously reigned. Lucia hesitated, her lips parting as she searched for the appropriate response.
"Good evening,"
she replied, her tone soft and measured, betraying none of the turmoil that stirred within her. Damien lifted his head, his blue eyes meeting hers, and Lucia felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite identify, a spark of curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest hint of intrigue. She quickly averted her gaze, focusing her attention on the flickering candles, desperate to regain the sense of peace that had eluded her. The silence that followed was weighted, charged with an unspoken energy that Lucia found both unsettling and strangely compelling. She could feel Damien's eyes upon her, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Forcing herself to remain outwardly calm, Lucia allowed her fingers to trace the intricate carvings of the wooden pew, her mind racing.
Why had Damien come to the church, of all places? And why did his presence unsettle me so?
As if sensing her unease, Damien shifted in his seat, his voice cutting through the stillness once more.
"I didn't mean to disturb you, sister. I'll just be on my way."
Lucia felt a flicker of disappointment at his words, though she couldn't fathom why.
"You're not disturbing me,"
she found herself saying, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. Damien paused, his brow furrowing slightly, and Lucia cursed her own impulsiveness. What was she doing, engaging with this man, this embodiment of the very world she had chosen to leave behind? Yet, as Damien settled back into the pew, Lucia couldn't help but steal another glance in his direction. There was a vulnerability in his posture, a hint of something that piqued her curiosity. She had heard the stories, of course, the tales of Damien's reckless behavior, his disregard for authority. But in this moment, he seemed almost lost. The realization unsettled Lucia, stirring emotions she had long since buried beneath the weight of her vows. Turning her attention back to the altar, she forced herself to focus on the familiar rituals, the comforting rhythm of prayer. But try as she might, her mind kept returning to the young man who now sat beside her, a silent observer in this sacred space. The minutes ticked by, the only sound the occasional crackle of the candles and the distant hum of the town beyond the church walls. Lucia found herself growing increasingly aware of Damien's presence, the tension between them palpable. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Lucia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Why are you here, Damien?"
The young man's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with a startling intensity.
I I'm not sure.
He admitted, his brow furrowing.
I just felt drawn to this place. To you.
Lucia's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. Drawn to her? The implications of his words sent a shiver down her spine, and she found herself at a loss for how to respond. Damien seemed to sense her discomfort, for he quickly averted his gaze, his fingers tracing the worn wooden pew.
Forgive me, sister. I don't mean to trouble you. I'll take my leave.
As he rose to his feet, Lucia felt a sudden, inexplicable pang of regret.
You're not troubling me.
She murmured, the words escaping her before she could stop them. Damien paused, his eyes searching her face, and Lucia felt a flush of heat creep up her neck. What was she doing, engaging with this man, this embodiment of the very world she had chosen to leave behind? Yet, as their gazes locked, Lucia couldn't help but feel a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in years, a spark of curiosity, a longing for something more. And in that moment, the weight of her vows felt heavier than ever before. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for part 2.